we're going to do something kind of unique prior to jumping into this meditation. Um, as I see it, the purpose of these meditations, of these groups, is to facilitate a kind of expansion of our minds. And I think that the best way to do that is usually seeing from vastly different perspectives. However, the thing that we often do inadvertently when we see from another perspective is relate that to our own perspective. So, in this little discussion we're going to do prior, and then certainly in the meditation, we're going to really attempt to see from another perspective, from another vantage point, without referring to our perspective in any way, shape, or form. And this will make more sense as we move on. So the first thing I want to do is ask everyone a question, and feel free to give an answer if you have an answer to this, or just let it be contemplative, whichever the case may be. It's totally open form prior to us going into the meditation. But my question to everyone: is it possible to really know the intention behind someone else's words and actions? And let me define this framework just a little bit more to make it make a little bit more sense. Of course, of course, we can know the heart, the intention of someone else's, behind someone else's words or actions after we really get in there and get to know them, after we ask questions, after we communicate with them. And so when I ask the question, is it possible to really know the true intention behind someone's words or actions? It's really referring to that framework right there, prior to having truly communicated, and come to understand the heart of another. So that's the contemplative question at this point. Is it really possible to know the true intention behind another's words or actions, prior to having communicated with them? Now, this is kind of like where we left the conversation in our last meditation off, which was, in the meditation we described one person being in a house and then another person being outside of the house. Granted, you're both looking at the same house, but depending on the vantage point in which the person is viewing the house from, depends on what it looks like in there. So is it possible to know what it looks like on the inside of the house for the person on the outside? Of course, through communication. And is it possible for the person on the inside of the house to know what it looks like, from the perspective of the person on the outside of the house? Of course, through communication. So we're wanting to take that framework right there and apply it to something a little bit different. But perhaps before we jump into that slightly different way of utilizing this mechanism, I want to open up to the group and ask if that's agreeable, if before we move to be able to leverage this idea, I'm wanting to see if we're all on kind of the same page. Is that agreeable? Okay, cool. So just making sure we're kind of all on the same page. So now, the next kind of contemplative question from this basis of understanding would be to extend that idea out, let's say to a tree. So, for instance, we all call a tree by that word, a tree, and it's the name we have given to it. just like just like if we were to come into a conversation with what we believe another person's intention is, then we would be we would be we would be bringing that definition to them. We would be we would and we've all agreed that we can't really know another person. So anything we might be bringing to the table is about them is is not really about them. We can't really know them. And so we're bringing the same idea to a tree. So a tree, you could say, never stood up and said, "I am a tree." And yet we bring that to a tree every time we're in relationship to it. Every time we're with the tree, every time we're in relationship to a tree, we bring that baggage to a tree. And as such, we experience the tree in relation to that baggage. And the way we were talking about this a moment ago with another person, we were saying we can't know their intention, which is the same kind of word as, same kind of idea as bringing a label or a meaning or a definition to that other person. We can't really know them. We've all kind of agreed upon that. Anything we would bring is a kind of baggage that we're bringing to them. So we're just transposing that idea from another person to a tree. Now, this really makes us look at our thinking in a completely different way. It really causes us to kind of look at the thinking itself. This is what it does. It really causes us to not refer to the labels or definitions, but in order to know the tree, but rather to attempt to experience the tree directly. It's like, what is really there? And now, what if we could the question is, how deep can we take this? How deep can we, how much can we ask ourselves the question, has a tree ever stood up and identified to me anything that it is? Has it ever stood up and said, "I am a tree. This is what I am. Now you know"? And if a tree hasn't done that, then has a rock done that? Has a rock ever stood up and said, "I am a rock. This is what I am. Now you know"? Or even as far as to say the world. Has the world ever stepped forward and said, "I am the world. This is what I am. Now you know"? No, but we do bring to those things our labels and definitions. And as such, when we're in relationship to any of those things, we experience those things in relation to those labels and definitions. So the real question is, what is really there? What is really there? And some of us sometimes might, in that moment, we might put a word in there like the divine, or everythingness, nothingness, or consciousness. There's many different words that we could put on there. But the moment that we do that, we're not in true relationship with that thing anymore. We've again brought baggage to it. But yet we do need a word in order to point to it. It is helpful to have a word to point to the divine, to the nothingness that is the everythingness behind the labels and definitions of a tree or of a rock. But the real power is in continuing to ask the question, has a tree ever stood up and said, I am a tree? And it really starts to make us question everything, and there's quite a freedom that's right on the other side of the labels and definitions that we bring to each moment unknowingly. There's quite a bit of freedom. There's quite a bit of love, even, right behind the labels and definitions that we bring to each moment. And oftentimes we're so convinced, because it's used so frequently, that we know this wall that is of our house. We know, oh, that's a wall. That's the wall of our house, Brian. It's become so obvious to us that we don't usually experience it in another way other than through that label or definition. And that's less obvious when we refer to an inanimate object like the wall. So that's why we do this with a tree. Did the tree ever stand up and say, I am a tree? That's the name we gave to it. That's the label and definition we assigned to the tree. Those labels and definitions have meaning, and as such, we experience the tree through that which we're bringing to the tree. But if we can really not refer to those labels and definitions and meaning, and experience the tree, the literal magic that is behind those labels and definitions, what would be different than what would be different about doing that with a wall? If it really is our own labels and definitions that we're bringing to the people and objects and things that we're in relationship with, then what would be the difference in doing it with a tree? What would be the difference in doing it with a wall that would be different than a tree? So before we move on to the very next step, I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are about this at this point. If it's true that we can't really know another person, and I was saying without really deeply listening to them, without asking them questions to get to know them, but you guys so elegantly brought to the table that maybe you can't even really truly know another person. And so we're bringing that idea to everything else. If we operate with a knowing of what the other person is, and we pretty much, all of us will recognize the dysfunction that can inevitably happen in that, when we believe we know the intention of another person's words or actions. Well, maybe at a more subtle level, it's a kind of dysfunction to believe we really know what a tree is. We really know that divine piece of life. And really, we're just trying to leverage communication in a way that highlights the nature of the mind. That's all we're really trying to do, to just point out what the mind is doing. And so, of course, we would move this from a tree to every moment in our life, even a wall. Possibly we're bringing all this baggage unknowingly. We're looking through all of this baggage unknowingly in each moment of our life, and maybe that's a more subtle dysfunction that we could continue to refine. So, what are your guys' thoughts about this so far? Before we go on to the next step, is this step 2 agreeable? Is this step making some sense, or are we a little bit off base here? What would you guys say to that? Okay, great. Yeah, I thought that was so well said by everyone who spoke to that topic. I think the last thing I might say about that topic before we um, do the 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 third point. These other two were stepping stones to get to this third place. Is that even saying that this coffee cup is a coffee cup, or is even physical, or is white, or green, or to say this coffee cup is anything, even to say the true nature of this coffee cup is energy, or to say anything about this coffee cup would be to limit our experience of it. That doesn't go to say we can't use all of those words to point to it, and for us to relate together to it, but if we want to authentically relate to the cup, then we wouldn't want to bring the baggage of those labels, definitions, and meaning to it, would we? Just as if we truly wanted to relate to another, we wouldn't bring the baggage of our labels, definitions, and meanings of them to them. It would be very off-putting for them, and we wouldn't really experience them as such. We would only be experiencing ourselves. And so is true for this cup. Again, to bring any idea to this cup will be to experience ourself rather than the cup. Now, the last step I'd like to take this, and before we do a meditation, in this little group, it kind of flipped this time. Usually we have a discussion afterwards and the meditation prior, but this time we did the discussion beforehand and the meditation after. Because I think it can be helpful to talk through these things with our conscious mind too. Now, if, and really, I think Paul and John and probably everyone was thinking it, but I think you guys both referred to this already. I think it was you, John, right away. You're like, I don't really even know the intentions behind myself most of the time. That's ultimately where we can land with this, but we're going to do it in kind of an interesting way. So if we've landed now on the idea that we can't truly know anything if we're bringing our own labels and definitions to it, then we might become more curious about the thing. And if this thing has this, if we're connected then to this, I'm going to use words, this magic aliveness, that this divine, even that's a label that's carrying a lot of baggage, I think, in this conversation, but this magic, let's just use that word, then we might start to become more curious about what we might look like from that object's perspective, from the perspective of the tree, from the perspective of the cup. What do we look like from its perspective? And so to do this, we have to do quite a mind expansion kind of exercise. We have to step out of our own perspective and look at ourselves from the perspective of the cup or from the perspective of a tree, and look at ourselves directly. And if we weren't bringing any baggage as a tree, if as a tree we weren't bringing any baggage to the relationship, if as a tree we weren't bringing any baggage when it looked at us, then we might start to see that truly this person is undefinable, is unknowable, is pure magic, is complete mystery. But the mind would say many other things about this vehicle, about this body. It would say, as Stephanie said, unlovable. Or it might say stupid. Or it might say a human. Or it might say physical. Or it might say many other things, in which literally creates which is, I guess you could say, creates our experience of the body being those things. And so, again, if we've really gotten to the point to where we can look at a tree and realize that the tree never told us what it is, and then be in relationship with that tree directly, on the tree's own terms, not on ours, then we might get curious. Again, I'm saying all this in. We might get curious about what we look like from the vantage point of a tree. And so in our own mind, we would kind of turn around and face ourselves. And if the tree wasn't bringing any baggage, any of its labels and definitions and meaning to it when it looks at you, then it would see how completely magical this body is, how completely divine-like, how completely free, how unknowingly infinite, how there is, it would see only freedom. It wouldn't bring to the table physical. It wouldn't bring to the table human. It wouldn't bring anything. But again, it's neat to see how the mind then, when we've went from the perspective of the tree back to our own thinking, and then we look down at our body, and again we see all of these labels and definitions and meanings again. Oh, it's physical. Oh, it's Brian. Oh, it's human. Oh, it's unlovable. Whatever. And so what we're really doing in this conversation again is we went these 3 different steps to explore how we really can't know. First of all, we can't know another. And then to make it easier to look at ourselves with innocent eyes, instead of doing that from the perspective of another, we did it with a tree. We just needed another point of reference that we knew would look with innocent eyes, so we could look at ourselves. So I'm curious, from your guys' experience of what we just explored here, what was your experience in this? Were you able to kind of see yourself in this, from this innocent perspective?